Welcome, everyone. At LRXD, we believe in a brighter, bolder future where health and well-being become accessible to all. Our digital talk series, Take Care Tuesday, is a deep dive into some of the practices and valuable advice when it comes to health and happiness from some of the top thinkers and creators in wellness, sustainability, futurism, and social activism. I'm your host, Sarah Shedd, and I am very happy to be having a conversation with author and teacher Tracee Stanley. Tracee was introduced to the practice of yoga nidra in 2001. She immediately recognized it as a healing salve for the world and began to incorporate it into her life and her yoga teaching. She left her high-stress career as a Hollywood film producer to delve deeper into the study of the practices that were empowering and rejuvenating her so she could share them with others. Tracee travels extensively to offer yoga nidra, meditation, self-inquiry, teacher trainings, and workshops. Radiant Rest, her latest book, her first book, was published by Shambhala Publishing. Tracee understands the demands of life as an entrepreneur, wife, and stepmom. Her effortless way of sharing ancient teachings in accessible ways is her superpower. So thank you for joining us, Tracee.
Thank you, Sarah. It's so great to see you. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Thank you. So to start, I would love to hear just a little bit of your background. You know, in the bio, we read that you left a high-stress job in Hollywood to pursue writing and teaching more. I'm curious what that transition was like. And yeah.
Yeah, it was an interesting transition because I discovered yoga and meditation right at the same time that I began my career in Hollywood in around 1995. And so I had been practicing at the same time that I was kind of going into this career that was really stressful, long hours, a lot of pressure, a lot of competition. And I feel like yoga helped me to kind of manage that in a way. And it wasn't until about 5 to 6 years into my yoga practice where my career really started to take off. And I had this epiphany that I needed to share the practices of yoga, because what I was seeing was that I was working with a lot of individuals who would have been considered extremely successful, A-list movie stars, and they were all really unfulfilled. And the yoga that I was practicing was all about fulfillment, finding fulfillment in the everyday. And so I thought, I have a little bit of disposable income. I wasn't married. I didn't have any kids. I want to open a yoga studio so that people can access these practices. And I also wanted to make them accessible to people. So I opened up this little tiny yoga studio. I hired a bunch of my friends who had just finished yoga teacher training. And I opened up a donation yoga studio in West Hollywood. And what I started to realize was that, first of all, I was seeing transformations because I wasn't teaching. I just owned the studio, but I was going in and practicing after work or whatever it was. And I was seeing the same people from my neighborhood because most of them were walking to the studio or it was a short drive. And what I really started to feel was a parallel almost existence, where on the one hand, I had this yoga studio and I was practicing yoga every day and very dedicated to my studies. And then at the same time, I had a very successful career that was also high stress. But what I think happened was I started to infuse the yoga and the principles of yoga, because a lot of times we think about yoga and we think about the postures, right? Mm-hmm. We don't think about the fact that there is a lot of meditation, there's breath, there's philosophy about how you live, how you practice nonviolence, how you practice honesty, how you practice detachment from things. And so I started to bring those philosophies into my own personal life and my job. And then also I started to share them in ways that were really accessible with my team, right? So I had a team of like 10 12 people, and I began to share those philosophies with the team. So it was almost like within this company that grew from 3 people in 1995 to like 60 people by 2002, we had this little microcosm within the company of people that were very relaxed, and not, even though we were working long hours, we had practices and things that we were doing that we knew could help us to sustain. So I was always suggesting to people, oh, go to this yoga class or go to that yoga class. And then eventually I started teaching yoga in the afternoons at lunchtime, a couple of times a week in our cafeteria. So to answer your question, I feel like it was a natural progression where eventually I actually started teaching. I did a teacher training with one of our mutual teachers that we shared. One of my first teachers, his name is Yoga Rupa Rod Stryker. I did a teacher training with him, and then really felt like, oh, these practices are so powerful. I really feel like I want to share them, but I'm doing all this work, for this film company. How can I share them? So I just decided I'm going to do a class at 6:00 in the morning. I'll teach a class at 6:00 in the morning. And basically all the film and music producers were going to that class in the morning. And I noticed that on those days that I was teaching, I actually felt so much more inspired and so much just more fulfilled, and like I was making a difference, because I could see the difference in the people that were coming in over time to class. And so I really just wanted to figure out a way to transition to a place where my whole life could be about sharing these teachings. And I tried to infuse some of the things into some of the films that we made, but there's always outside circumstances of who gets involved. It takes a lot of people to make a movie. And so the transition was not, I wouldn't say it was seamless, but it was much easier of a transition than just kind of one day deciding, oh, okay, I'm going to go teach yoga. It was, I really had many years of being able to figure out how to completely transition into something that was fulfilling every day for me, as opposed to just when I was teaching.
That's beautiful. In that, from 1995 to 2002, where you really saw it grow and expand, I loved how you talked about it was rooted in sustainability in those long hours, and finding the energy flow where productivity is just natural. Being productive is just more seamless. So could you see shifts in students or other people in that community during that time?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the yoga studio opened a month after 9/11.
Wow.
So, it was, I would say the first thing that I realized was the responsibility of creating an alchemy, so to speak, that could create an effect. Because yoga, as I understood it, was not just about doing some postures. It was about actually leading people to a place of balance. And so we opened the studio in this time where everything seemed to be very uncertain, not unlike now, right? The pandemic. Everything seemed to be very, very uncertain. It seemed to be a crazy time to be opening a business. And people were coming in deep, deep pain and discomfort, whether it was physical or mental or emotional or spiritual, looking for relief and looking for community and people to connect to. So I think that we kind of jumped into this place of it being a healing space immediately. And I think that shifted. So I got to see immediately how the practices of yoga were healing just within that first, year of being open. But then over time, I feel like because I was bringing in yogic philosophy and looking at these practices of detachment and looking at the practice of there's a place within us that's always steady. There's a place within us that is always joyful, and using that as like the basis of our office, and we had a saying in the office where it was bad news with a smile. Like if you came in, you had to come with bad news, you had to smile, and we had to find some humor around it. And then it was later where, as my practice deepened, I started to notice that, oh, I'm actually addicted to the crisis, right? And being able to fix the crisis. And so, how do we as a team start to move away from this idea of like being engaged in the crisis? Because that's not healthy for the nervous system. So, there were so many different places and kind of transitions where we got to see how yoga could be really healing, not only in the yoga studio, but in the workplace.
And through now transitioning to your book, Radiant Rest, in terms of addressing the nervous system and getting out of that crisis state or addictive state and finding the humor, finding the joy, finding the relief for your immune system and nervous system, can you talk a little bit about what yoga nidra has become for you and what that practice and what this book has really meant to you and what your intention is in sharing it and in writing it?
Yeah. So, first of all, let's just define yoga nidra. So, yoga nidra is known as the yoga of sleep. And it's oftentimes referred to as sleep with a slight trace of awareness. And it's like, okay, well, what does that mean? Right. And if we think about the fact that we have these stages of consciousness, we have the waking state, the dreaming state, the deep sleep state, and there's another state that's known as the fourth. And that state is kind of like this place of the void. And if we think about a moment or some time where maybe we fell into like a deep, deep, deep sleep, and when we woke up, we were like, what just happened to us? Where did we go? I know something profound happened in that space. I know I feel deeply rested, but I can't touch it. It's similar to that kind of feeling. Yoga Nidra helps us to move into NREM stage of sleep with consciousness weaving through all of these states of consciousness, as well as the brainwave states. It can help us to access these deep states of theta and delta, which are really saying that the body itself is at rest and all external awareness has been kind of shut down. And we really can tune into this place of stillness. So, after about 15 minutes of practicing Yoga Nidra, which is this practice that is really a deep relaxation practice that allows us to we do it laying on our back, so kind of in a sleeping position, and we're systematically guided to relax the body. And as we relax the body, we start to move into this place where we actually lose awareness of the physical sensation of the body. And maybe we become aware of energy and the fact that the body feels almost like it's dissolving and we're becoming more still, we're becoming more light. And then as we just continue to surrender, we can surrender to enough to this place where it feels like we can follow this life energy back to its source. And when we follow that life energy back to its source, then we just rest in that spacious awareness and we're held unconditionally by the earth beneath us. And we can really, for once, just let ourselves be held and even let the earth hold everything that we're holding. And I feel like that is a place that we don't often get permission or give ourselves permission to go to, because the world wants us to keep do. And the more that we're doing, the more that we feel like we're worth something. But if we can actually be still and connect to the eternal part of ourselves, then we actually start to realize that we're already worthy. We actually don't need to do anything to be worthy. And we get to reclaim our birthright of worthiness and be able to really tune into more wisdom. Because right now we're trying to gain wisdom from everything outside of us. And when we get still, we actually get to tune in and realize, oh, I actually have wisdom. And that wisdom is coming from within me. And of course, the mind in this process gets to relax for a little while we're in yoga nidra practice. So for me, I didn't have an intention on writing this book. I was actually working on another project, and Shambhala Publications reached out to me and asked me if I was interested in writing a book on yoga nidra, and my first reaction to them was no.
Mhm.
And then I kept getting questions from people when I was doing workshops asking, well, do you have a book? And I sat down one day and I just thought, well, if I'm going to write a book about yoga nidra, what would it be? And I really thought about what is my relationship with the practice? My relationship with the practice is not only one of a practice, but it's one of a relationship with the divine feminine and this aspect of being able to be held by the mother and literally letting go of the personification of our actual mothers, because we know our actual mothers are not perfect. But we have this oldest ancestor here, which is the Mother Earth, right? That unconditionally holds us, that is abundant, that is supportive. And how can we rest upon her in her lap and really trust that we're supported? And when we can do that in a practice and we can create that relationship, I think it transforms us, because it also heals the relationships that we may have with our own mothers or women in our life that don't require them to be present to have forgiveness and to have healing, right? We can do it just on our own. And as well, the state of consciousness that is yoga nidra, that I spoke about earlier. And so the book for me was really a guide that I was offering to people for them to create and cultivate their own relationship. I'm not interested in anyone kind of mimicking the relationship that I have, but here I am in the book kind of giving tools to people to say, here's the tools that worked for me. Here are other tools that I have acquired over the years. Here are tools that came from the practice itself. And if you do these tools, you'll find something in the book that works for you and will allow you to have a relationship that lets you tap into your own power and your own clarity.
How do you approach a student who is a novice, but also maybe turned off a little bit by divinity or divine or things of that nature? How do you approach these practices in that type of setting?
Well, this is why this is such a great practice, because it
Right.
does not require you to believe in anything. It only requires you to have the desire to deeply rest. And that's why when I say that there are three kind of portals into relationship, the first portal is the simple technique of deep relaxation. It's the simple technique that I'm exhausted and I want a practice that is going to help me to deeply rest and access perhaps feeling as rested as if I've had 3 hours of sleep in 20 minutes, right? So that's like the first thing. Um, the second thing is I want to experience a different level of consciousness. I want to experience a different brainwave state than I'm used to, actually understanding that I've moved into this brainwave state while being conscious and aware, right? So this idea of divinity is really something that it descends by grace. It's not something that is inherent in, we need to talk about X, Y, and Z. It's, you have an experience and then you can translate that experience, which is why I really love to have people do self-inquiry practices or free writing right after the practice, because in that liminal space, that's the space where we get a lot of wisdom and information. And I feel like we need to record it for ourselves, because there's so much external noise between all the things we have to do, that if you just kind of roll over and get back to work, you just forget all of the things that happen, which is why we have to learn the same lessons over and over again, because we forget.
And have you seen in your own life shifts in how these practices, and I'm sure you have, and I'm curious just your response, how these practices shift your way of marketing and your way of actually having sustainable energy in the work that you do, externally?
Yeah, I mean that, for the marketing question, it's always been, since I understood the philosophies of yoga, I would say that I've always believed in ethical marketing. And I've always been able to see, and I remember taking a marketing class in college where they talked about the psychology around marketing. Um, and it's, this idea of marketing to capitalize on the idea of scarcity, or to capitalize on people's fears of not being good enough or not having the tools. That's never been something that I'm interested in. We all have all of the tools that we need to be able to be successful and to thrive. They're all within us, they're not outside. And so the only thing that I'm ever teaching, no matter what, is don't look outside for it. Look inside. And that's, specific to a lot of the teachings in yoga, as you already know. Um, and then I think, just as far as having a book come out and doing, a virtual book tour, I have pretty much always been, at least for the last 20 years, I have really been refining the practice of the compassionate no. I understand my capacity for being able to do things, and I create boundaries so that I can reserve my capacity in a way that is sustainable. Um, there's always a feeling when someone asks you to do something. It's a feeling that you have to tune into. Is this going to be generative for me? Or is this going to be draining? And I used to do that with projects, when I would meet with writers and I would meet with directors, and I would love their script. And then I would sit down with them and I would have an intuition. Is this going to be a draining process, or is this going to be a generative, fun, creative process? Because I'm going to be spending a year with this person on their project, right? And so it's similar. I feel like it's very similar, where you have to understand your boundaries and you have to have the courage to be able to set those boundaries without the fear that you're going to lose something. And if you're losing something, is it actually okay to lose this thing, right? Because if it's not creating abundance in your energy and in your inspiration, then it might not be worth it.
The last question that we ask all of our guests is, if you were to give all of us advice on one action that we can take tomorrow to make the world happier, healthier place, what would your advice be to that?
My first thing would be to look at your own belief systems and the beliefs that you really hold dear, and really be able to kind of trace back to where those beliefs came from. Are they even yours? And do you know them to be true?
And I think we could all practice more writing around that, especially.
Yeah, of course. I'm a big fan of doing some free writing.
Is there anything else you want to leave us with? You can tell us the best place to get your book or your website. Anything else you want to share?
Oh, thank you for asking. So you can find out more at radiantrest.com. You will get all the info about where to purchase the book, where to sign up for the book club if you're interested. Those are the places to look, and you can hear the podcast, my Radiant Rest podcast. Links are up there as well. But most of all, I think what I want to leave you with is take time to rest, take time to create boundaries around rest and communicate with the people in your household that you need time for rest, and see if they're open to creating that space with you.
Thank you so much, Tracee.
Thank you so much for having me, Sarah. It's been great to see you, and I really appreciate you. Thank you so much.